Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're always about the positive vibes here on the show, and with me right now I've got a very special guest. He is a trailblazer and pioneer of the world of wrestling radio shows. He's got a new book. It's been out for a few years, called Matt Memories. He's also the host of the podcast Pro Wrestling Spotlight, and looking forward to talking with him about his career and time in the wrestling business. Pleased to welcome the one, the only, John Arezzi. Welcome, John, to Wrestling with Heart.
Very cool to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, it's my pleasure. So tell me about your childhood. Where are you from?
I was born in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn. I was born in 1957, so lived in Brooklyn up until the age of 7, and then family moved out to Long Island, where I grew up. So I'm originally born and bred New Yorker that transplanted to Nashville in 2000.
It's so cool. A lot of people I know have kind of gone back and forth between the East Coast and the South, and New York is just a great area. I know it's got a lot of snow and it's very cold, especially in the wintertime, but you'll find that there's a lot to do, lots of interesting places to visit and go see. Now, wrestling, I'm sure, was something that you enjoyed watching as a kid. Tell me about your first exposure to the wrestling business.
I think it was around 1964 or 64. It had to be because it was right before we moved to Long Island. And it was basically my sister, my older sister, calling me into the living room. I was 7 at the time, and she was watching wrestling. And she called me into the living room, and there was a little person's match, to be politically correct. And she goes, "Johnny, these little people are fighting each other on TV." And, and I went into the living room and watched, and I was like, this is cool. And that same day, Bruno Sammartino, who was the champion, I saw him on TV for the first time, and I was hooked as a 7-year-old right after that. It was just something I had never seen before. And between, the little people wrestling and seeing Bruno Sammartino and doing an angle with Dr. Jerry Graham at the time, I was all in and I got hooked.
The cool thing about wrestling is you got all these really interesting personalities, these larger than life characters. You mentioned Bruno and Dr. Jerry Graham. What was it about those guys that made you go, man, this looks so fun? I'd love to find a way to break in somehow.
Well, I never even thought of that when I was 7, but it looked real to me. It looked like these guys were fighting, and Bruno was an Italian American, which I am as well. And so that kind of struck a chord to me at a young age. But I never really had any aspirations to get into the business until the early 70s, and I was a young teen, and I was a fan of Freddie Blassie, who was a babyface, a hero on the West Coast and a villain on the East Coast, and read a lot about him in the wrestling magazines. And it was like, I like to get involved, and that's when I started a fan club for Freddie back in 72.
Well, before wrestling, what was your dream? What did you want to be?
If I could say anything about what my dream was at an early age, it probably had to do with baseball because I became a Mets fan at the age of 9. I didn't really think of anything professionally, but baseball was always something that I loved. Music was something that I loved. And then I fell in love with pro wrestling. I knew I wanted to do something different. And fortunately, throughout my career, I've been able to work in baseball and work in wrestling and work in music. So kind of a dream come true in
All,
three different professions that are all high profile.
yeah, it's all connected, finding things that you love to do and are passionate about and just shoot for the stars. You'd mentioned Freddie Blassie starting a fan club. How did that all come about?
It was just I saw the fan clubs in the wrestling magazines, and I wanted to start a fan club. I At the time, the newsstand magazines with these columns, you have to get the wrestler to sign a permission slip. Freddie was wrestling at Madison Square Garden. I typed a little permission slip up, took it to the dressing room entrance, which I couldn't get into, but a security guard went in the back, and lo and behold, got the permission slip signed by Blassie. I had it authenticated with his former fan club president, Jeff Walton, on the West Coast, and he wished me luck. He said it was authentic, and I started writing what would be called the King of Men newsletter, which came out on a monthly basis. And I think the first issue came out at the very end of 72, early 73. So it was just me, winging it and doing a newsletter on Freddie Blassie. And it grew in prominence. People joined the club. 1974, I won the Fan Club of the Year from the the Wrestling Fans International Association and the Best Monthly Fan Bulletin. So that was in 74. So that kind of opened the door for me to then try to get pictures and stories published in the newsstand wrestling magazines, which I accomplished in 74 as well when I was 16 years old.
Do you remember the first article you remember writing for the wrestling
Oh, yeah.
newspapers?
Yeah, it was in Tommy K's Wrestling Guide magazine, or Official Wrestling Guide, and it was a story on Fred Blassie becoming a manager and taking on Nikolai Volkov as his first protege. So that was my first story that was published, and I got $25 for it. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's always good to not only have the passion and the dreams for what you do, but to get paid for the work that you're doing. It seems like it's very fulfilling, and it led you to so many other opportunities. Did you have a particular favorite article that you wrote over your time as a journalist in the
Ooh,
wrestling
there's so
business?
many I've had. I can't even begin to count how many I had. I wrote freelance for every major wrestling newsstand magazine, and then Ring Wrestling Magazine was kind of the place that I uh, did most of my work for. I'd gotten to work in their offices during summer vacations after as I was attending college. But my favorite story, I mean, back then. I did one on superstar Billy Graham beating Bruno Sammartino in the Boston Garden in his WWF debut. That was a good one. Stories on the Valiant Brothers, Captain Lou Albano, Mil Mascaris. So there were a lot. I can't pick out one that was my very, very favorite because, just when I look at them now, reminiscing about those stories, I'm like, I was just very blessed and fortunate to be able to even have them published at such a young age and get press credentials as a teenager, which was crazy. The only one I can remember doing that are Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman.
Well, you're an elite class of people being able to do those things. It's not very often when you have somebody at that young age to be able to get their stories published in a major publication. It's got to feel good to be able to do
Yeah, it
that.
was. It was good. I always just either had, I don't know if it was having the confidence in my abilities or just unless you try, you don't know.
That's all. It's what it's about.
And I was never afraid of rejection.
You just have to do what you got to do and be strong and go for it. That's all what you can do. And so you also were a freelance photographer, got to work for the WWF, taking pictures. What was that experience
Well,
like?
I wasn't an employee of theirs. I was a freelancer, but I used to give Vince McMahon Jr. photographs. And those ended up in the Madison Square Garden programs and, other promo shots that he used. I always would, say, "Hey, Vince, what do you think of this?" And he would take my contact sheet, check off some pictures. I'd send it to him, and he used them for whatever he wanted to. I guess it wasn't even employment, but I talked my way into the ring to wrestle and had two matches in January of 78, both at TV. And I had no training, didn't know what I was doing. I just knew people, and they were like, "Why do you want to do this?" And I was like, "I just want to give it a shot." And I wrestled Dusty Rhodes in a handicap match on January 10th, 1978. Me and Sylvana Sousa against Dusty, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I got my head handed to me, literally. And then that same night, for the second taping, it was me and a wrestler named Joe Turco, the Continental Nobleman, and we teamed up against Chief Jay Strongbow and High Chief Peter Maivia, the Rock's grandfather. So those were the only two matches that I had, actually.
Do you remember before going to the ring, having conversations with Dusty or Peter Maivia, just about how the match would go? Because I'd imagine someone that hasn't trained to be a wrestler
Well, they
stepping
didn't
in
know
those.
that. They didn't know I didn't train. I said, they asked me. Gorilla Monsoon was the booker, and I had gotten introduced when I told the Grand Wizard Ernie Roth that I wanted to go into the ring, and when he's tried to talk me out of it, and I said, "Give me a shot," and then he said, "All right, show up in Philly," which I used to go to every 3 weeks to take pictures. So here I am showing up with wrestling gear. Gorilla Monsoon comes out. And he goes, "You're working?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Heel or babyface?" And I was like, "Heel." He goes, "Where have you worked?" I was like, I work down south. That's all I said. So, and then you get into, then I find out, I'm working with Dusty. And in the locker room, there was kind of a little bit of a buzz, like I'm the photographer guy. What am I doing in there? So that's when they put Savannah Sousa in the ring with me, probably to keep an eye on me. And I was so bad that after this, in the second taping, and we talked about how long the match was going to go. So Dusty, when Monsoon is like, "All right," Dusty goes over 4 minutes, whatever, and then we just kind of talked through a few things. Um, and then the second match was like I was told to stay out of the ring up until the finish because obviously they knew I didn't know what I was doing. And I got tagged in at the very end of the match and from over the top rope, and then Strongbow threw me to my V. I got a headbutt. 1, 2, 3. It was all over. So it was that. But that what happened after that was like 3 weeks later. I'm setting up Madison Square Garden to shoot the superstar Billy Graham against Bob Backlund championship match when Backlund was winning the title. And I was at ringside, and they pulled me off of ringside because my picture was in the program that night as a wrestler. And they were like, "Well, since you wrestle, you can't take pictures anymore." So I jobbed myself out of a job.
Mm.
That was the end of that.
Yeah, it's tough because you can't always do both at the same time, so you got to pick which one you want to go for and
I don't
just
even know why I
pursue
did
that.
it, Stan. I really don't. It was just kind of like I wanted to see what it would be like. I wound up
Yeah,
writing
test
the
the waters.
stories. I want not even test the waters. I don't even know. I think I lost my mind. It was like temporary insanity. Why would I even want to do it? And then I did it, and then I actually wrote a story about it for Ring Wrestling Magazine. But I was kind of almost like at that point, I was getting ready to graduate college. I didn't see wrestling as a career because it was kind of like, if I'm getting paid 25 or $50 or $70 for a story and some pictures, that's not enough to make a living off of.
No, and so you have to find things to do and combine things together to, you know, to eat essentially.
Yeah, to make a living, make a career, and I had seen enough of wrestling, and even to this day, I get into wrestling for a few years, then I leave, then I come back, then I leave, then I come back. It's kind of in my whole life. I can't divorce it totally from my life because it's been a big part of my life. But what I do at this point is more about history and the reminiscing of the radio shows and the other things that I did in the business over the years.
Yeah, when did you start the radio show Pro Wrestling Spotlight?
Ironically, I started it in college, 1975. And I was auditioning for the college radio station, and I had an idea to do a wrestling talk show. I knew I was interviewing wrestlers anyway for magazines. And the college program director and music director both were wrestling fans, so they gave me the shot. And I called it Pro Wrestling Spotlight, and it ran on college radio for 2 years. Um, had guests, had phone callers, and that's where it kind of started, And I didn't really put it on commercial radio until 1989. Because at that time in the 80s, most of the 80s, I was in the music industry and worked in baseball. And at the end of '89, my music business went under. And then I was like, "Well, what am I going to do now?" I said, "Maybe I could do a wrestling talk show," and that's what I did. I was able to get on a little tiny station on Island on April 8th, 1989, and debuted Pro Wrestling Spotlight on commercial radio at that time.
Yeah, and it went until the mid 90s. Is that right?
95 up until 95. Yeah.
Okay.
And I went on several different stations. WNYG was the first one. It was a little tiny mom and pop owned station on Long Island, small signal, but we started developing an audience because I was, was half kayfabe, half not. Then it started getting more inside. And then I went to a bigger station with a better signal, and then went to a New York City station in 1992 in January with Vince Russo, ironically, and stayed on that for a while, and then bounced back to the Long Island station. So it was a roller coaster, but I did 300 plus shows. So,
That's a
and I got
lot.
them all. I got them all on tape and digitized. So those archives are there.
Yeah, I mean, you were doing it for so many years. Do you have a favorite guest?
Ooh, Mick Foley, Paul Heyman, and they were on more than anyone else. I mean, both of those guys were on at least 50 times over the course of the show. Those were the two favorites for me, was Mick and Paul, because they were on all the time. And Mick credits me for helping develop his promo style, because anytime he wanted to come on the show, I let him go, and he just start practicing his promos. And Paul was just so insane and so great that he was on quite a bit, and it's fascinating now to hear those early Paul E. Dangerously guest segments. It's very classic stuff.
Yeah, it seems like it's so cool. It's fun to be able to work with the people that go on to be big stars and you remember them back when they were just getting started in the business.
Yeah, Paul E was pretty prominent in WCW at the time. Mick had just left Texas, and then he started his first run with WCW. So I watched the evolution of both of those guys. And Paulie was always a brilliant guy. I knew Paulie when Paulie was actually a member of the Fred Blassie fan club when he was just a young kid. And Mick, watching them and seeing how they developed and over the years, I'm very fortunate to be able to be so close to them over those early days of their development.
Yeah, and it ran strong. You were doing it for a long time. What led to the show getting canceled?
Well, I mean, I segued as I grew audience and as the show became more controversial, because that's when the scandal started to hit, from Billy Graham coming on my show in 1990 to talk about how steroids had ruined his career, his life and his health, and it just became controversial. I also, as the audience grew, I started becoming a promoter where I put together the first big wrestling fan convention called Weekend of Champions. So I had wrestling conventions in 90, 91, 92, 93 with Ric Flair, his first one ever. I mean, so I did that. Then I formed a wrestling company league called International Wrestling All Stars, and I did tours of Southeast Asia with guys like Jake the Snake Roberts, Greg Valentine, Bob Orton, Conan, the Mexican Minis, Medusa, Wendy Richter. And I also put together I guess a consortium of people in 93 to bring AAA into the United States for the first time. And that was with entertainment attorney Ron Scholar, who was one of my listeners and wanted to start promoting Lucha. So through Dave Meltzer, he hooked me up with Conan, who hooked me up with Antonio Pena. And before you know it, we're promoting Lucha Libre. We're promoting AAA in Los Angeles in August of 93, selling out the building and turning away 8,000 people. So as all this stuff happened, my life was a roller coaster. There were great months, there were great, with income, and then there were several months with no income because radio stations never paid me to be there. I bought my airtime, and I would then turn and sell advertisers and sponsors to make my living. And that's when I started promoting all those other things. And then after I met Vince Russo, and that relationship was soured almost immediately. We split up after only like 3 or 4 months together in business, and I just got burnt out. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was going to be turning 40 years old. I really had no money I was near bankruptcy. The wrestling business, my weight had ballooned up to almost 400 pounds. I was stressed. I was unhealthy mentally and physically, and I just called it a day in 1995. I was like, well, that's kind of, or even 96 rather, because I still promoted some lucha shows in 96. And after I think mid 96, that was the end. I had gone off radio in 95, but I still promoted some shows up until the fall of 96, and then it was over, and I took a real job working in radio, in country radio.
Yeah, I mean, when you're doing so much like the radio, the wrestling shows, just traveling all around the country and around the world, it can be tiring because you're trying to train your body to do so much. I mean, it's not like you're bumping in the ring, but you're
No, but
going.
I took some bumps on tour, with DDP. I took some bumps with some of the guys when I was on tour as the ring announcer or whatever when I was promoting shows. But it was more of the nature of the wrestling business, the individuals involved in the wrestling business, and the people you had to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and they're workers.
Yeah, and so
I was too nice a guy to be in it, I think.
you've traveled a lot and you're doing so much. You're doing the country radio stuff. It's a transition. Talk to me about your time working in country radio.
Yeah, back in that time period in 96, I had kind of loved country music. I kind of really started listening to it. I was working with an artist in the 80s named Patty Loveless, who became very, very successful. But I was kind of like, I needed a job. They had an opening for a salesperson to sell advertising for the station. So I was fortunate enough to get the position. And then all of a sudden, uh, with everything I'd learned and just my personality and the ability to sell and to put together promotions, I grew my income and I got a big client base over the course of time. So I went from a small Long Island country station in 96, and in 98, I got hired away by the New York City country station, Y107. And so I worked there until 2000 when I was hired away to work in national radio and for a fledgling little TV network called Great American Country in Nashville. So every year got better for me from 96, till, I'm still kicking. Well, I've done a lot of things. I've gone from country radio to artist management to podcasting to consulting. So it's never a dull moment in my life.
Yeah, you've got so many different pies that you've baked over the last several years, being able to work in so many different capacities in the landscape we know as media. I want to talk about some of the stuff you've done outside of wrestling, outside of the broadcasting world, as far as charity work, and what kinds of things have you done over the years to help out in your community?
I really didn't do a lot of charity work until I got involved with country music. And country music had causes like St. Jude's Children's Hospital, which all of the community got involved with. And once you get to know about what St. Jude's does, that's an easy thing for you to get associated with, and to have your have country artists that go visit St. Jude's on a regular basis and become someone who is a strong advocate for them. And then a friend of mine who I actually managed in the music business in the early 80s, um, we lost touch with each other. And then around 2006, I just Googled him and found that he was living in Nashville. And I reached out and we got together, and he told me about a foundation he was working for called the Songs of Love Foundation. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. I was like, well, tell me more about that. He says, well, the Songs of Love Foundation is a charity that if a child is terminally or chronically ill, the charity gets a professional songwriter to write a song about that kid. So they have the kid fill out an information sheet, like, my name is Little Sally, and I love music, and I love my dolly, and my mommy and daddy, and my favorite, so they assign a songwriter to that. And I was like, well, I think this is a wonderful project. And I wanted to be involved. I wanted to know how I could create awareness and increase their visibility. They were based out in New York, but the footprint that I had in Nashville, I said, well, let's see what I can do down here because I got a lot of connections. So with my friend Carl Alaco is his name, who still works for the Songs of Love Foundation. We were able to get the founder, John Belcher, to allow us to try to put together a project for down there. And before you know it, we find a little girl with a bad affliction. They didn't think she was going to survive. Her name was Destiny Dyer, and we put together a song. Not me, I wasn't the writer. Put together a song called "Destiny Song" that was written by Carl and three top country artists: Anita Cochran, Deborah Allen, Tammy Cochran. And that song was a professional in studio. We had studios donate their time, and then I went to some big video producers that I knew. They donated their time, and before you know it, Destiny Song is done, and it's a music video. And this poor little girl, who, thank God, she's still with us today. And then I was like, well, let me see if I could supersize this. And I knew people at Universal Music Group, and we put together a CD. That was called the Songs of Love, Medicine, and Music Country compilation, where we were able to get song licenses from songs from I Hope You Dance by Leanne Womack to Forever. I got a copy of it here. I still have some copies of it. And it was an amazing CD that then we had distribution through Universal Music Group, and it was distributed nationally to raise funds for Songs of Love Foundation. So that was a project that over the course of my career, it was wonderful to be associated with them.
Yeah, it seems like a fascinating business to be able to come up with songs based on someone's likes and characteristics, and being able to put that together for a good cause. I mean, that's so amazing.
Yeah, they've done thousands of songs, thousands of songs. They've gotten annuities from different companies. They've had songs cut by Billy Joel and David Lee Roth and Julian Lennon, on and on and on. I mean, they do incredible work, and they're still based up in New York. It's songsoflove.org. So although I'm not associated with them at this point in my life, any chance I get to create any awareness for them up to this point, I certainly do. About a little over a year ago, some associates of mine that I worked with at Great American Country Television, they have a big production company out of Knoxville, and they knew that I was involved with baseball and had some connections with the Mets, and they do the production work for a foundation called the Tunnel to Towers Foundation. The Tunnel to Towers Foundation is an organization that was formed in 2001 after the terrorist attacks on 9/11, where a firefighter by the name of Stephen Siller basically, I'm sorry, I had a call coming in, but let me just put the phone to the side here. A firefighter named Stephen Siller, once the towers were hit, he was off duty. He was a fireman in New York City. And once the towers hit, he turned around and went through the Brooklyn Battery tunnel, even though it was closed off. He put his gear on and ran through the tunnel right up into the towers and never came out. His brother Frank Siller started a foundation in honor of Stephen, and it's called the Tunnel to Towers Foundation. And what they do is they pay off the mortgages for first responders, for military veterans. They build for homeless vets villages. They are a wonderful foundation. So once my friend in Knoxville said, we would like to bring some baseball players in to cut public service announcements for T to T. Do you know anyone? Can you help? And I was like, absolutely, I think I can help. And they've had so many celebrities do these types of things for them. They have quite a robust presence all across the nation on various TV shows and PSAs they run everywhere. So I was able to get New York Mets first baseman Pete Alonso to the New York Mets to do one, and then Terry Collins, who I do a podcast with, a former Mets manager, did one. John Gibbons, who was an old roommate of mine, who is now the Mets bench coach. And as I got involved with them, um, I kept learning more about what they do. And so now it's kind of like I'm a go-to guy for them where they're like, well, can we get other people associated? So I was like, what about, some people in the wrestling business? Because Mick Foley, for one, is so philanthropic and he lives here in Tennessee, right, one of his homes is like 10 minutes from where I live. So I said, let me reach out to Mick to see if he would be interested. And Mick immediately said yes. He knew Tunnel to Towers. He's done quite a bit of work in helping vets and disabled vets and homeless vets and all the causes that he's associated with. So we cut a PSA with Mick in December. That's being edited right now for broadcast. And a few months ago, I was able to get Medusa to do one as well. Because right after 9/11, she did a bike run, a motorcycle run across the country to raise money for the causes associated with 9/11. So that's what I'm kind of doing right now. And the more I got involved with Tunnel and Terry Collins, who uh, you know does the baseball podcast with me. He's the star of the Terry Collins show. He got associated with Tunnel by becoming an ambassador for them, running their 5K run, going to some of their groundbreaking events to build homeless vet villages. And I've gone to several myself, and I do whatever I can to help raise awareness. And they're prominent on the podcast that I do. We tell stories from different people they've helped.
Well, what is it about giving back to the community that gives you the most joy?
Well, I mean, my life has been blessed. I believe that it's just something that you do, something that you have a responsibility for, and it could be any cause or charity. As long as you believe in it, then those are the ones that you could do the most good for.
Yeah.
And so I don't get involved in a ton of different things, but if something strikes my heart, like kids, like vets, like first responders, uh, that's something that I take pride and joy in when I'm able to do something that's going to help create awareness for those types of foundations and nonprofits.
Yeah. Always got to do what you can to help others, People are
And you
going.
look what you're doing with this podcast. I mean, my goodness, who else in the wrestling podcast space is doing something that you're doing by bringing people on to talk about the causes that they work with, and what you're doing is great because you're creating awareness with individuals who in the wrestling business, some people say, well, they don't do anything for anybody, right? And now you're getting all these stories from people.
I appreciate that. It's always about the niche. We're trying to fill that void, because there's really nothing else like it. And we're just trying to create a platform to spread awareness and try to make the world a better place one step at a time.
Well, you're doing it, so that's kind of
Thank you.
cool,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm doing right now. I mean, that's kind of the thing. The Tumbler Towers, it's t2t.org. They ask you to donate $11 a month, and so it's a great cause. So go to their website, t2t.org or songsoflove.org, and check both of those out.
Yes, just going to wrap up and say thank you so much, John, for doing this. I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time to come on Wrestling with Heart. It means a lot to me and to my listeners and viewers that are watching this on YouTube. Where can people find more about you? I know you've got your book, Matt Memories, as well as your podcast, Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Talk about where you can find all those things, and feel free to plug and promote anything you want.
Well, the Pro Wrestling Spotlight is kind of like I've recycled these shows 3 different times now. They're all up on Apple, Spotify. Just go to John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight. There's years of content on there. There's a YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Lots of my archives are on there, photographs, movies, videos. So that's my YouTube channel. I have another podcast, which is dormant now, but there's several episodes up there. Memories from Madison Square Garden, talking about those early days of wrestling. And what I do currently is the baseball podcast, the Terry Collins Show, in hiatus until the season starts again. So we have a YouTube channel. Just look for the Terry Collins Show. And we had 33 episodes this past season with the biggest Met stars of not just this generation, but also from the past. Fascinating baseball talk if you love the New York Mets. So just check out the Terry Collins Show, and I'm the co-host of that with the unbelievable Mets former manager, Terry Collins.
All right. Well, John, thanks again, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Thank you so much for the invite, and I look forward to coming back someday.
All right. Thanks again. Take care. This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.